Cool. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're going to talk about cricket. Hope you're as stoked as I am to be here at 4:30 on a Friday after a long day to talk about the real sort of nitty-gritty of cricket. Just before I begin, I'd like to highlight my co-authors. Danny and Patrick are in the audience, and Addy and Joe are back home in the UK. So just to give you a little bit of a flavour or background on cricket, well, it's a very quintessential old British sport. The first international match was actually in 1844, and it was between, well, you could probably guess, Canada and the mighty cricketing nation of the United States of America. So it's a good trivia thing to take away from today. In terms of money, the Indian Premier League, a domestic competition, the TV rights in 2018 sold for close to $7 billion US. And in terms of eyeballs on the sport, cricket is a big global sport in terms of the number of people watching. The India versus Pakistan game last year in the World Cup saw over 320 million viewers. Now you compare that to something like the Super Bowl this year, which was more like 100 million viewers. So cricket it's a global game. It's very popular. So just because I'm aware that I'm in the United States of America and you might not have ever heard anything about cricket before, we're going to spend a few moments just going through a little bit of an intro to cricket. So what is cricket? Well, firstly, it's got the best terminology of any sport. We have googlies, silly mid-on, and Danny's personal favorite, cow corner. In terms of the actual setup of the sport, we're going to focus on one-day internationals. These are matches of 2 innings with 300 balls per team. Pitches, baseball parlance, and a maximum of 10 wickets or outs. And essentially, whoever scores the most runs wins. So it's very simple in that sense. So how do we actually go on? How do we score runs? So we have our bowler. He delivers the ball to the batsman, who is protecting his wickets. In this example, the batsman strikes the ball down the ground, and the batsmen run, they cross, and they complete 1 run. The fielder picks up the ball and then returns it to the bowler. They try to go for a second run, but are unable to. So that is 1 run. The other way of scoring runs is through what we call boundaries. So in this example, England's Jos Buttler, he strikes the ball cleanly down the ground and it clears the rope. This is 6 runs, the equivalent of a home run in baseball. In this example, he deflects the ball behind him. The ball bounces just before the rope. This is 4 runs. And these 2 shots really encapsulate the 360-degree range of hitting in cricket, which is obviously a very clear contrast with baseball. So we're going to use baseball as a sort of touching point just to kind of orientate ourselves. So we'll start with Fenway Park, just down the road, and we'll compare that to another cathedral of sport, Lord's in London, the home of cricket. Now, in terms of the surface area of the field, in cricket, generally the field is around 50 to 60% larger. But in terms of where our actual players are located, so our batsman in baseball is at the top of the pitch, whereas in cricket, the batsman is in the center. So very different already. And in both cases, we have our pitcher or our bowler, and the orientation here is the same. So in baseball, there's an approximate 90-degree hitting range. If we had that in cricket, then it would look something like this. But of course, because they're in the middle of the pitch, we have this 360-degree hitting range. Okay, so that's how you score runs, and that's what the field looks like. But how can you be out? So one option is something we call bowled. So that goes quite quickly. It's about 90 miles an hour ball. We'll see a replay. So in this case, the batsman misses the ball, it hits the wickets, and that means that the batsman is dismissed. He is out of the game from that point onwards. The other alternative is very similar to baseball, where you can be caught. So in this shot here, Ben Stokes takes an incredible catch, which led to this immortal line, "You cannot do that, Ben Stokes," which is the title of our paper. And I'd like to highlight that he's not wearing a mitt when he takes this catch. So that's very much the basics of cricket. Let's get a bit more into the nuance. So we're going to talk about the trajectory of the delivery, and that's going to be something we'll come back to throughout the talk. So in cricket, the ball pitches, it lands before it reaches the batsman, ideally. That's what you're aiming for. And that really dictates the type of shot, like the response from the batsman, because the ball can bounce at very different heights depending on where it lands. We normally talk about that in terms of line and length. In this first example, we're going to focus on line. In this delivery, the ball pitches just outside the eye line of the batsman, and he then strikes the ball to his right. In this following example, the ball pitches much more towards him, and this strongly dictates the type of shot he's going to play. It's a completely different shot in a completely different direction. The other part of this equation is length. This is the distance from the batsman where the ball bounces. In this example, the batsman is able to lean forward and strike beautifully through the line of the ball for a boundary. In this example, the ball bounces further away from the batsman, so his weight is more back, and he then plays a very different stroke, a cross-batted stroke. And that's really, that line and length really dictates how the batsman will respond. And finally, all the examples so far have been pace bowlers. This is a spin bowler. So these bowlers bowl much slower, and in this example, the ball turns from left to right. And actually, Abdul Rashid, the bowler here, normally he bowls balls that spin from right to left. And this is the aforementioned googly, so another little bit of something to take home with you. Okay, so hopefully that's got you up to speed somewhat with cricket. So what are we actually trying to do here? Well, so in cricket, it's somewhat different in terms of what the captain does. So on the field, the captain has a really important strategic role. He essentially has two key things. He needs to choose his bowler and where to locate their fielders. And so in cricket, we have nine fielders, which we can position, and we have to cover this wide, this 360-degree hitting range. And where you put them is going to be dictated by the type of bowler, the tactics that they might be trying to use, the batsman, the match context. So we can have fields where all 9 fielders are within 20 yards of the batsman, or we can have fields where several of them are on the boundary. And really, the way this has been done traditionally is to kind of look at shot maps like this. So this circle on the right is supposed to sort of represent the cricket pitch, so it sort of lines up with the image on the left. The batsman is in the middle, and the color of the zones gives the proportion of their runs that they score through each zone, so essentially broken down by angle. But the problem with these is that they are essentially devoid of context. So we don't know the type of bowler they were facing, the type of delivery, the match context. So really, there isn't really that kind of actionable insight we want to actually make our kind of on-field decisions. So hence, we need a model to capture the nuances. If we try to do this from a purely data analysis point of view, like breaking down the data into separate, smaller and smaller buckets, we'd very quickly have a tiny sample size. And again, we wouldn't have that actionable insight. So our goal, really, is to develop a flexible methodology that predicts the probabilities of a batsman's shot type. And we want this to be adaptive for like specific bowlers, specific match contexts. And to do that, we need to first define shot type. So we want to get away from outcome, and we want to focus more on the process. So we split it into 2 components, shot aggression and shot direction, which I'll go through now. So first of all, this is essentially what the data point looks like. So the end of this black line is where the ball is fielded from this shot. Now, we don't actually know from this data point what was the batsman actually trying to do. They could have absolutely slammed it straight at a fielder who was stood in that spot, or he could have just sort of deftly sort of deflected the ball into a gap and somebody had to run 20 or 30 yards to field the ball. So we want to get away from that kind of outcome-based measure, which is what those previous kind of analysis maps showed, and break it down in terms of the aggression of the shot. What was their intention with that shot? So we take a highly detailed data set of shot labels, 25 distinct labels, which break down really, it's about, are they going forward to the ball? Are they going back? Is it a cross-batted stroke or a straight bat? And we did some analysis of these and grouped them into 3 different buckets, essentially. So aggression label 0, these are essentially when the batsman's trying to defend his wicket. Aggression label 1, this is where they're trying to score maybe 1 or 2 runs. And then aggression label 2, that's when they're going for those boundary hits. If a fielder didn't get in the way, generally these types of shots would go to the boundary and you'd get 4 or 6 runs. The next part is we want to factor in the direction of the shot. So cricket has this kind of handy terminology that has existed for a couple of 100 years, and we're going to use that. These names are kind of, a bit mad if you don't know cricket, but they are useful because they just have that kind of reference point. So we use those. And we layer on our aggression labels. So I'll walk us through this a little bit. So zone 13, this is a shot through the mid-wicket region. So that's a cross-batted stroke, similar to a kind of baseball strike. with an aggression label of 2. That means that the batsman is trying to score a boundary from that delivery, essentially. Zone 12, this blue inner region, again, that's through the mid-wicket region. That's where the direction is being aimed. But instead, they're going for this aggression label 1, where they're trying to score 1 or 2 runs. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's where the ball is fielded. This is like a graphical representation just to kind of visualize this. They could, the ball could be, so it's trying to capture that intent rather than necessarily the outcome. And just finally, the orange sections at the top of the screen behind the batsman, for these we combine aggression labels 1 and 2 because generally balls struck in this direction also have the pace on the ball from the delivery from the bowler. So they would often run to the boundary were they not to be stopped by a fielder. And finally, the example on the left is for left-handed batsmen. For right-handed batsmen, everything is just flipped. Okay, so the next step in our chain of model is to craft dynamic personalized features for batsmen and bowlers. We have 46 different features. They're listed on here. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through them all. And these are based on the previous 500 balls that a batsman has faced or a bowler has delivered. So we have an example here. This is Joss Buttler. This is his defended rate. This is the proportion of defensive strokes that he plays. And this has evolved over the course of his career. And we want to have these sort of dynamic features because cricket is evolving. And we want our model to be able to reflect that, and players evolve as well. You might ask what we do before we get to 500 balls. Well, in that case, we don't want to throw away the data. The data is sacrosanct. Like we want to keep it. It's useful for our model. So instead, in those cases, we take the global mean for that feature and take a weighted average with the player's data up to that point. And then finally, we've got our shot labels we've got our labels where we're trying to predict the type of shot, and then we put this into a long short-term memory model. Now in this, with this model, we want to use the temporal nature of cricket, the sequential information with the ball-by-ball data. And so this looks at the 5 previous deliveries to the ball we're trying to predict the shot type for and that given ball. And these encapsulate the match context, like the score, so how many runs the team has or how many wickets they've lost, and also the trajectory information. Where did the ball bounce in terms of its line and length? And with that, we also join to that our personalized batsman and bowler features, capture the traits, the fingerprints of our players, and so that we can then make our predictions. We went through a range of types of model and sort of in terms of complexity, in terms of both the model architecture and also the features that we used. First of all, we just very naive kind of model, just based on purely the data. And then we worked our way through a random forest, a basic feed-forward neural network, and we finally settled on this LSTM with the personalized features, which gave us our best performance. Sorry, Okay, so we built our model. Now what can we actually do with it? Well, we can start playing some games. So we could take a bowler, Trent Boult in this instance, a New Zealand left-arm bowler. He's bowling to Ben Stokes. And what we can do, we can take our shot type labels, and instead now we can simulate different balls, different deliveries, and play some games. So in this case, we take all of Trent Boult's deliveries from the World Cup final last year, and we swap in Ben Stokes as the batsman. And then we can have a look at what his tendencies might be, what are his traits. So that's visualized here on the right-hand side. So each zone is colored according to whether Stokes targets that zone more or less than the average batsman. So red zones are where he targets those zones more, blue is less. And then, as well, so we could look at Stokes, but now we can start playing games and look at other batsmen. So for example, Johnny Bairstow, a right-handed batsman for England, or Joe Root, another right-handed batsman for England. And what we can do is essentially it's a classical science experiment. We take all of Trent Boult's deliveries, and literally the only thing we change is the identity of the batsman. And then we can visualize these maps and try and pick up on their traits. So starting on the left, Johnny Bairstow, he has a very strong power game down the ground, and that's reflected in these red zones straight down the ground. Whereas somebody like Joe Root, He's more about kind of using the pace on the ball, deftly deflecting the ball either behind him or to 90 degrees to himself. And then finally, we have Ben Stokes, who has a very different, which we've just seen, and has a very different kind of spatial fingerprint in terms of where he is trying to score his runs. Okay, so what can we actually do with this? So a really common task, like before a game for a coach or an analyst, is to sit down and study the batting lineup of the opposition. And essentially, the idea here is that you want to distill some information and pass that on to the fielding captain. The fielding captain is essentially trying to optimize his bowler and his field locations so that the batsman's run scoring potential is limited and or dismiss them. So essentially, we want to use our model to try and help facilitate this. So we can use our models to generate what-if scenarios. So we could do that in a pre-game or we could do that in a pre-match setting, and that's a section in our paper and also on our poster. But in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on in-game tactics here today. So we're going to base this around the World Cup final last year. It was the greatest game of cricket of all time. It was at Lord's, again, the home of cricket. England versus New Zealand. Neither had ever won the World Cup. New Zealand batted first, and they scored what was seen as a fairly modest total of 241 runs. England, in reply, they started quite badly, but they recovered well. They were left needing 15 runs off the final 6 deliveries of the innings. This is a challenging number of runs to score over just 6 balls at the best of times, and this was the final 6 balls of the World Cup final, so the pressure's on. So we're going to step through that over. First ball, Trent Boult, our bowler, again, that we've seen before. He delivers this, what's called a Yorker delivery. This is essentially like a toe cruncher is how it's, I guess, unaffectionately known. So this is where it bounces basically in line with the batsman's feet. And that makes it very difficult to get under the ball and get a powerful, clean connection. England don't get a run. Now they need 15 off 5. Next ball. Boult goes for a very similar tactic, and it's a very similar outcome. Stokes is able to get a fairly clean strike, but it goes straight to the fielder. Now they're left with 15 off 4. 15 off 6, now that was hard. 15 off 4, you really, it's going to be really tough. Third ball. Boult essentially goes for a similar kind of tactic, but he gets it a little bit wrong. It bounces just before Stokes, and he's able to get under the ball, get a really strong, clean connection, and clean rope. In terms of what our shot prediction would be from our output, so this is predicting the shot probabilities for the type of shot from this delivery with Ben Stokes as the batsman and Trent Boult as the bowler. Now, the first thing to note is that the inner ring, basically, there's very low probability of those aggression 1 label shots. And that's because of the match context. It's because of the type of delivery. And then this is where this is a nightmare for the fielding captain in terms of where they should locate their fielders. Because this type of delivery is actually quite easy to hit in terms of it's quite easy to hit to various parts of the ground. In terms of the prediction, there's really a 180-degree angle where Stokes might be expected to target to try and score 6 runs, or 4 or 6 runs. So that's a nightmare for a fielding captain. And this highlights the zone that he did go through. He went for that big shot through the mid-wicket region. And we could compare that to like a naive kind of shot model, so just based purely on the data, and that's shown on the left-hand side. So it's using our shot labels again, but we just use the data to come up with those percentages. And the clear thing here is that we don't have that, we have that inner ring, and if we just use that naive model, we would predict that there'd be a much higher proportion of low aggression shots, which just doesn't fit the kind of cricketing picture, the state of the match, and also the type of delivery. We could also compare it to Stokes' historical shot map. Now, he's more aggressive than the average player, but again, it's kind of indicating that there's going to be a good chance that he's going to go for a low aggression stroke, which just doesn't make sense in this context and because of the type of delivery. Okay, so crunch time. 4th ball of the over. Now, essentially, Boult has gone for the same tactic, 3 balls in succession. Now, he's got the execution pretty much bang on the first 2, but there's a risk-reward trade-off with this type of delivery. Basically, the window of opportunity is quite small. If you get it slightly wrong and it reaches the batsman on the full, he's able to get under the ball and get a clean, good connection quite often. Or it could be like the previous delivery, where it bounces just slightly before him, and again, he can get under the ball. It's a lot easier to get that clean strike away. So we can use our model to kind of think about, okay, well, what do we do now? From the captain's point of view, where should I put my fielders? So we're going to just focus on the line. We're just going to focus on length here and keep the line constant, just for simplicity, or some level of simplicity at least. So this is that fourth ball if Trent Boult got a Yorker. In terms of our shot prediction, it's indicating that Stokes is going to look for that big shot over mid-wicket that we've just seen, or he's going to go straight down the ground. If instead Boult gets it wrong, the ball doesn't bounce before reaching the batsman, Stokes, again, he's going to look for that big shot through the mid-wicket region or straight down the ground, but it's going to be more likely to be an aggressive shot because it's a lot easier to hit. And then the other option is that it bounces slightly before Stokes again, like the previous delivery. And again, we see this big shot through the mid-wicket region or straight down the ground. And essentially, this is trying to capture the potential kind of scenarios if you go for this type of delivery. And with this, we can plan for failure and hope for success. So the useful thing from a captain's point of view is, okay, if we stick with this tactic, but even if we get it slightly wrong, I can actually put my fielders on the boundary in similar kind of locations to cover all those different eventualities. Now, there's an element, though, of Boult becoming quite predictable. He's essentially gone with the same tactic 3 balls in a row. So maybe you should try something different. So we can do that with our model. We can change the length of the delivery. So in these 3 examples, the ball bounces further away from the batsman. And when we have our predictions here, we see that Stokes, again, he's going to target that big shot through the mid-wicket region, but which he obviously favors. That's a trait of his, but it's shifted around to behind him. So in terms of, from a fielding captain's point of view, you'd put your players on the boundary, shifted around. So again, like, you can vary your tactics, maybe get a bit more of an element of surprise, and position your fielders accordingly. So what did actually happen? Well, Boult went for that Yorker again. He got it really badly wrong. He's very lucky that that didn't end up in the crowd. And, well, in terms of our prediction, well, we just saw it, and yes, it is that big shot through the mid-wicket region. Now, any cricket fans in the audience will know what happened next, but basically, yeah, it went a bit wild. Everybody had their head in their hands. I know I certainly did. And they ended up actually tying the game. That happens about 1% of the time in this form of cricket, so very rare. And England ended up winning the cricket's equivalent of penalty shootout. And that's kind of where we come to our close. So the idea here of sports analytics in general, and like our talk here, is that England really won by the barest of margins. Just 1 run saved by New Zealand over those 300 deliveries would have won them the World Cup. And what we're trying to do with sports analytics and tools like this is just move that needle so that maybe we can save those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 runs and try and win more games and ultimately win trophies. So I'll finish there and say thanks very much for listening, and yeah, happy to take any questions.
All right, we have a mic here that we'll pass around for questions.
Okay, so this all makes a lot of sense, and it's really cool. I want to start off by saying that. But if you're Ben Stokes and you are also armed with this data about yourself and you see the fielders start to align a certain way, doesn't that give you a hint as to where the pitch is coming? And then can't you counteract that and beat the shift?
That probably is, to some extent, what has happened on that 3rd delivery. It's actually... that ball's come down at about 90 miles an hour, and he ends up on 1 knee. Like, that's a premeditated shot. It was actually, we have like a really long-term ball-by-ball database, and it was actually the first time we'd ever played that shot to a fast bowler. So it was a premeditated shot. So I think, yeah, it's kind of, you can't, as a batsman, you are looking around the field and trying to second-guess what the bowler's going to do. There's the sort of game theory, kidology kind of thing with that, but yeah. But no, yeah, it's certainly a good point.
All right, then thanks a lot. Give it up for Will. Don't forget to vote via the Sports Analytics app. The polls close at 6 p.m. And we hope to see you all tomorrow at the finals that will start at 10 p.m. at 210 BC. Thank you very much.